But one of the first things that you would be able to do when you look at time series data is that when you have a really good model, you'll be able to learn certain types of behavior without knowing exactly what's impacting its or affecting its behavior, and you can replicate that movement with a margin of accuracy, if you will.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. This is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech innovators, entrepreneurs, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements they've established. I'm your host, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's topic, Navigating the MedTech Maze, Predicting the Future, and Defying Startup Odds, with Amir Hayeri. Amir, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Bit of a background for our listeners on Amir. He's got quite a diverse background in developing novel medical software technology and using machine learning technology. Amir developed a technology to anticipate and prevent chronic disease complications. He's presented this technology at a number of American Diabetes Association scientific summits and is actively contributing to the science of glucose monitoring and how it can anticipate and prevent glucose-based conditions for patients with diabetes. Bioconscious is the company, and I think that'd be a great place to start. You're out in Vancouver. I grew up out that way, so tell me a bit about the Bioconscious journey with your background and how it came to be.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. So I come from, I guess, a long line of healthcare professionals. My family's been involved with healthcare for generations, and I was raised in a family. My parents really liked me to, be involved with healthcare. So I, kind of like grew up in that household. And then, I kind of feel like my generation really likes machines. So my passion was with the rest of my generation. So computer science, machine learning, AI, that's what really excited me. So when I was done with my education, my kind of like thought process was, well, okay, now it's time to specialize. Do I want to go back to med school? Do I want to go back to, continue on kind of my educational journey? I did have ambitions. I kind of was just like feeling a little bit like I'm just like letting time go and I'm not really doing something real. Academia is awesome. It's great, but you do mostly research. And I kind of wanted to hit the ground running. So the thought process was, is there a way for me to bring the two together? I knew enough about the biology in the background. I knew enough about what we can do with machine learning and computer science. So I had some projects. Like one of my famous projects was replicating what your front desk nurse would do. But they're awesome research projects. And one of the places which I think UBC really helped was kind of like drilling this into my head, like, focus on one condition and do it really, really well. So had a good friend of mine. He was type 1 diabetic, always complaining about, the fact that he was late to class, he was managing. He wore a Medtronic pump, I believe, a Medtronic sensor, a continuous glucose monitor. And he was very excited because he just got a, kind of like a Fitbit watch back in 2016, 2017. And me being who I am, I kind of was wondering, I was just like, oh, okay, well, so I can take in all these three inputs and maybe I can build a shitty algorithm that ties it all together. Then what we'll do is we'll use machine learning, just because I knew we could do that, learn, how he behaves, and maybe we can predict, so depending on what type of machine learning you're doing, but one of the first things that you would be able to do when you look at time series data is that when you have a really good model, you'll be able to learn certain types of behavior without knowing exactly what's impacting its or affecting its behavior, and you can replicate that movement with a margin of accuracy, if you will. So I did that for him. It will take, his heart rate variability from his Fitbit watch. It would take in his pump information and his Dexcom sensor, continuous glucose monitoring sensor information would learn in about 7 to 10 days. And then it would try to predict what's going to happen an hour before it happens. And this was revolutionary because up until that point, he was only able to respond to, high risk medical events or complications associated with his condition, which was type 1 diabetes. And I don't know how much you know about it, but there are different types of diabetes. There's the spectrum. Juvenile diabetes or type 1 diabetes, the type of diabetes that you're born with. So your body loses its innate ability to manage your glucose levels, which is very important, because if you have too much of it, you'll die a slow, painful, gradual death a little bit sooner than others. And if it falls, there's risk of immediate death. So you have to, like, on top of everything else you do within the daily kind of like your life, you also have to think like a pancreas, right? You have to, like, oh, it's high, it's low, I need to do this, I need to do that. And so using the prototype that I developed, he was able to better manage. So he was able to anticipate events and then respond to them accordingly, rather than waiting for his glucose to drop below a certain threshold and be alerted that it has dropped and then react to it. And there's this really interesting thing about the 1 hour, 90 minutes or so horizon. If we tell users, for instance, something bad is going to happen today, like 2-3 hours from now, they usually don't do anything in daytime to do it. They'll wait 2 hours or so, and then they only react to it within an hour. So it seems to be like it's far enough where the user is not stressed, but it's also close enough where they feel compelled to do something about it. Anyways, right. So Ben really used his, enjoyed his sort of prototype, used it, and was interning at BC Children's Hospital. So he talked to it with the endocrinologist that he was working with. She invited me in. We did a pilot study for, potentially replicating the same thing 10 other times for 10 other teens and preteens. And that was awesome. Like, this was one of those like high moments. And the journey has, had several ups and downs and ups and downs. And certainly this was one of those ups. So I got invited and we got started. We had 2 major companies providing devices for the study. We did essentially replicated the same thing I built for Ben for 10 other kids. And we did it for 60 days, right? So 30 days of, learning users' behavior, fine-tuning the model if we have to. And then another 30 days where users who are using, type 1 children, teens and preteens, that are using a pump, a continuous glucose monitor, and would be willing to wear fitness wearable, would essentially allow the machine to see different types of glucose behavior and get better and better and better at it. And we did it with the help of BC Children's Hospital. Both companies donated devices and it was awesome. And we looked at the results, and the initial results were around 87% within the first 30 days. We're able to bring this back to, if memory serves well, lower 90s. And we were quite happy with it. And so we published the results at the American Diabetes Association. And that was essentially when I was kind of going to do the study and do the results, was how kind of like bioconscious sort of morphed together. There's a whole lot of like backstory in terms of how we got there, but essentially I thought this was good. So, you asked me about the story of bioconscious. I thought, that was a perfect name for it, because we want to build a computer algorithm essentially that understands human metabolism, and, continuous glucose data is the perfect place to start for building such a technology, because your entire body is effectively very similar to your car, except that one's burning gas, your body's burning glucose. And the beauty of it is that our bodies, being the marvelous machines they are, they use glucose, the substance itself, in various ways, rather, right? So we can talk about this whole spectrum of how your brain is the #1 consumer of your glucose throughout the day, to the point where you get a cut on your hand, that cut healing itself, how much scar tissue is left, and how fast it heals. All of it is determined by your sensitivity to glucose, i.e. how your body metabolizes glucose. So that's kind of like the story in a nutshell, if that makes sense.
It's amazing. So you were able to collect this data, which was, I'm assuming, scattered, and you had data points to go off of, but you needed to find predictors and commonalities through machine learning and data modeling. How are you able to collect that data, bridge that gap into an algorithm design, and bridge that gap into a product? Because that seems like 3 entirely moving mountains kind of a challenge between the three.
Well, if you say so. Well, it certainly wasn't easy. So we had to obviously do it in stages. Originally for the pilots and how we wanted to do it, we had to move really fast, quickly, break things, and nobody really cared because obviously people, patients and parents that signed up for the pilot project were told that this is just, we're cobbling a bunch of things together, may or may not work, be careful, use common sense, et cetera, et cetera. And we would, try to get that data directly from the device itself at the time, at the point of care, where the patient's using it. In the long run, though, when we wanted to scale this sort of technology in later years, then obviously we had other challenges. We noticed that initially when we got started, the regulation was at the time that the company that develops the device owns the data that it produces. It's not the patient, it's in fact the manufacturer. Gladly, though, within the I think first or the second year that we got started, there was a massive change of regulation within the United States. The Congress actually turned around and said, actually, no, the data belongs to the patients. The device companies are now only the custodians of the data. And if the patient, in fact, wants to share this information, the company is obligated to provide an infrastructure and pathway for this information to easily flow to where the user wants it to flow, which was great, worked out really good for us. But when we tried to collect the same type of data, so for instance, your wearable data, not at the point of care, but rather let's grab it from the manufacturer's servers, we noticed that we have these segregated databases online. Nobody really looks at them. They just sit and get overwritten. So for instance, your phone records the number of steps you take per day, right? Your number of steps is kind of like, whoop-de-doo. How is that going to help anybody? So that sits on your, the Apple's database. If you have a blood pressure cuff, that's on the, Omron's database, for instance. If you have a wearable, it's on, Fitbit's servers.
Yep.
And so bringing all of that information in a cohesive manner, so it's nice, neat, and mineable, was in fact very much a challenge. So the very first thing was like, okay, so it's segregated, it's on Apple's device, it's on manufacturer's website, it's on wearable manufacturer's website. So we would grab it, then obviously pre-processing, normalizing it, putting it in a place where you can now do a lot of like iterative machine learning, try different techniques, try different things. That was a challenge in and of itself. And then once we actually resolved that, then a completely unrelated but interesting challenge to resolve was that when you try to do machine learning algorithms that are trying to predict future behavior, you have to split your data early. And you don't want this to contaminate when you're training or validating it, because the algorithm is going to see it and it's going to try to predict the future, but you've already shown it to the algorithm. So we call it future leakage. So we had to like make sure and put, environments together where this doesn't happen, because it's a concern with all the models, right? You might get really good performance, but it's because, when you're training or trying to validate it, you're actually doing it the wrong way. So once we resolve that, then the question was, okay, this is awesome, but where is this data going to go? We're going to analyze it, but your care provider doesn't review any of this information on any of these platforms. That information is hosted on your electronic medical record, health record system. So now I open another can of worms. It's like, okay, so if we want to get this data to the person that matters, which is your principal care provider, be it your endocrinologist, your non-diabetes expert family doctor, that person needs to see how you're doing. That's the whole point of what we're doing.
Right.
So trying to get it to that ecosystem was another point of sort of a bit of a challenge. Everybody says they're either HL7 or FHIR or FHIR compliant. But when you go actually deploy, you're just like, no, absolutely not. They have their own little thing that you have to build, and that takes, multiple months. So that was also a huge challenge to try to resolve. And all of these data points are in a different format, different type of looking at it. Same thing with electronic medical record, health record system. Oftentimes where the physician keeps notes differs from physician to physician often, right? So the reason why I'm sharing all of this is because that's awesome. You resolve all of those back-end challenges for the data to flow and for something to happen. Then when you actually, when we fully resolved it, the question was, okay, how do we display it? Because at that point we had, a certain data flow. We could get real-time information that the patient's producing at home and predict, high-risk complications ahead of time, right? But this information needs to flow to somewhere. Somebody needs to do something about it, and it needs to flow up to the clinic. And so when we finally got connected with the EMR EHR, we noticed that they can't display the data that we want them to your, primary care provider. And that was kind of like, oh, crap. Like, we have to now done all of this, and we're just like, okay, that's the mission. When we do this, we're golden. We're going to exit. This is going to be awesome. We did it, and they're just like, oh, like, we need to display this somehow to the user. And we couldn't. Right. So that was that kind of like the theme of this whole journey has been, you solve one problem, you find 10 others. Solve another, 10 others. And it's just like, it's an ongoing thing. But gladly, just because of the team that I was kind of like fortunate enough to have, obviously that team has morphed and shaped into different things and evolved. But today, I'm very happy with how far we've come. And it's just been because, I was crazy, and the team was, the team I had around me was able to be open to my crazy ideas and be nimble enough and fast enough for us to outmaneuver some of the major sort of competitors that we encountered along the way. But today, because of their efforts, we have a system that I'm very proud of. At the end of the day, it comes down to, we keep people healthier for a longer period of time. And the way we do that is we sort of try to learn users' behavior, and we predict near-term high-risk medical events. And we do this for people who need it. So, for instance, patients with type 1 diabetes, patients with type 2 diabetes, intensive care that uses insulin. And hopefully, I think if the algorithm keeps seeing different types of glucose behavior, which we have preliminary data on today, is that it will learn more and more about how our bodies sort of function. And one of the things that diabetes has done, unfortunately, it has skewed our understanding of glucose metabolism. And, that's kind of like one of the things that we learned along the way, is that the technology that we're building today has implications in, predicting near-term complications for patients with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, intensive, type 2, I should say. But one day, I think it can actually predict different types of glucose behavior just by looking how your body on a daily basis is dealing with your kind of like different types of actions. Is it eating? Is it activity? Is it resting? And when we look at it, it's fascinating. Your body has a different profile of metabolizing glucose during sleep, has a different way of metabolizing it when you're active, different way of using it when you're stressed. And so in type 1 and type 2, the machine has learned, or has become smart enough, I should say, the algorithm is smart enough to be able to pick differences, right? So we cluster or create different buckets for different patients. And that makes me very hopeful. But anyways, I don't know if that answered your question. I did tend to ramble. Let me know.
No, I think that was great. There's I made notes of like 10 other questions that come out of this, and I know we've got a limited time here. But one of the things I want to ask you about all of that is the challenges that come with partnering, right? Because you've got a whole bunch of different access that you need partners to help you with this. You were talking about smart watches, but also like access to things and whatnot. And then you might have some partners who are in the space going, well, if you can do it, so can we, and we're bigger than you, and I might have more money than you, so I don't really need you anymore. How do you walk that line? Because I mean,
listen,
David versus Goliath.
Listen, I've lived through that like 3 times already. The first time was devastating. I almost was going to like change careers. So this is what happened when we did our very early study, our initial study. People like this, bear in mind, this was like, I think 2016, 17 that we did it.
Okay.
The idea was novel. It was crazy. It was just like, we're coming out of academia, and it's just like, we're hot and bothered and we want to do something, right? we did something and it kind of worked, right? Then we took it to BC Children's Hospital. They liked it. They saw the potential. They're like, we know it's cobbled together, but it could be beneficial. So they really sort of shaped it a little bit. And then we requested for devices, and these companies were like, oh my God, this, like, they read the protocol and they're like, this is awesome. Here you go, bunch of devices. And we used it. But what that meant was we were contractually obligated to share the results with them. So be careful if you get devices from these companies, make sure to read the contract carefully. But that's what it meant. We did this study and the results were good. But unfortunately, despite what they told us in school and in business courses, these companies are firstly incentivized in trying to replicate you. If they can't replicate you, they'll try to buy you. But if they can replicate your technology or get close enough, you're done.
Yeah.
So one of those companies that was a partner just decided to have this love-hate relationship develop with us, where they loved what we're doing, but they hated us for doing it. And they thought to themselves, they have a room full of, engineers from Boston, MIT, Harvard. Who's this bozo out of Vancouver, right? So they obviously started doing it. That was devastating. They stopped working. They didn't stop working with us, but they kind of like, okay, stop paying attention to us. All of a sudden, you're like, you're not that important. And then they're so certain that they're going to do this in a very short amount of time. They actually decided to do a press release on it. And that was like, shit. And the person that we tried the prototype on actually sent it to me, and my family and I still remember it to this day. Get goosebumps when I talk about it. We were driving back from Alberta. I don't know why we were there. And my friend sent it to me on Facebook. The press release came up and I read it and I was just like pulled over and was like, I can't drive. My dad actually took over. He's like, what happened? And I'm just kind of like, yeah, so this happened. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, yeah, me too. And it just like, didn't say a word until we got back. That was an awkward, long silent drive. But when we got back home and, I kind of like, when I just like shook it over, I realized that there are two things that we have that they don't. And, one is being fast, nimble. And at the end of the day, they are trying to copy my idea, right? It's my idea. I can bob and weave and move really fast and try to outmaneuver them if I'm smart enough. So put a lot of pressure on it. And that kind of pressure is, talk about loneliness and everything. That kind of pressure only does two things. One of the things is it either breaks you or it pushes you to, reach really deep down and find something you didn't know you have. And so far, I kind of want to feel like we're still around. So I've been able to persevere despite the pressure. So I thought to myself at that point that every diabetic app that I've come across has been very serious and is talking about something extremely serious, that you have to, oh, your glucose has dropped. Oh, this has happened. Like, it's just got this negative, feel to it. So what if we did something really simple beyond machine learning? What if we made this app that's not able to predict future events for patients, but it's also a little bit sassy. It gives you a bit of like, oh, is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's your blood glucose, right? Just yeah. Corny, quirky, but it's stupid enough that it's funny and it makes you laugh. And obviously we found a bunch of them and put it on random. And I said, let's just outmaneuver these companies. They're going to try to replicate it, right? We have a product, it works. We'll just, put it on the App Store. And it was serendipitous because right after that, within like a few weeks or so, a mother with a type 1 child found it, took it to one of these, hidden Facebook groups for moms with type 1. People started downloading it. And it was funny because we built a little code the guys built because I wanted to really, keep track of people using it, user experience, how is it? So they attached it to Slack. So every time we had a new account successfully made, it would go ping, right? So, when it's not, when we're not getting, accounts, I would be notified or they would be notified, something is broken or something. So anyways, it was just going bing every now and then. So I was happy. One morning I woke up and it was just like bing, 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 bing. I was like, damn it. So the code probably broke. We have to, redo this. And I'm kind of like emailing my I was slacking my co-founder Ricardo. It's just like, Ricardo, it's just this thing is going off. Like, it's just, what is wrong with it? And he goes in, obviously he's in the zone, out of it, doing his thing. It's like, okay, great. What is it? It's like, no, actually, we're getting a ton of users. Oh, let me check the database. Like, the number of users going up. And it was really good. So within 4 months, I think it was mid 2018, give or take, we had 15,000 active user accounts on our database, which was awesome.
Wow.
Tons of users, right? We have multiple functionalities, follower, uploader, et cetera, for patients and followers. But we had a bunch of users, and it was really good. And during this period, what we noticed was that type of like, give people a little bit of sass, like, you know, just offer something a little bit out of the ordinary, if you will, kind of would get people to, they had a binary reaction to it, right? They would either love it or they freaking hate it. But regardless of that, if they loved it, they'll take to Facebook and they'll post about it. If they hated it, they'll reach out to us and they'll tell us why they hate it. Like, for instance, we had this, it was around the time where Trump was running, "Make America Great Again." That's famous, the famous phrase. It was just like sending it in, like, "Make your blood sugar management great again," or like, we had different variations. I don't remember verbatim, but it got to a point where just like, it polarized so many people. They'll reach out to us, just like, okay, you're, you know, doing this, you're doing that, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we loved it because that meant an interaction with the user, collecting it, right? Information, like, you got to take these calls, you know, regardless of, you know, good or bad. You want to talk to people who are using it. And it was really fun. But unfortunately, though, that led to a situation where we had a ton of users. We're trying different types of algorithms. So at any moment in time when we had a new user, that meant 72 different machine learning models with different horizons, different objectives, different architectures would start running, and these would run on server farms, right? Like Amazon AWS. So they would run, and so 15,000, you do the math, 15,000 users active, like 72 models per, et cetera, like, I don't know how many that is. But what I do know, though, is that, you know, our server time came to, I think, like $7,000-8,000 per month. And for server time, which is relatively cheap, that was high around the time. It kind of was just like, oh, that's like another, like a full-time developer for the team. And I was spending my own savings, and, you know, I kind of like had a trademark that was bought, which was really good, but story for another time. So I was spending my own money trying to not attract funding and investment up until that point. But then it got to a point where these like bills were high, and if you don't pay Amazon, you know, I think it got to a point where we haven't paid them. Like, if you don't pay them for 3 months, I think they cut your service right away. So I think we had 2 months, and we're just like paying them a month so it doesn't turn into 3 type of thing. It's just, oh my God, it was awful. So I think I processed the last payroll, and you know, I sat down with my 2 developers at the time. I think Ricardo, Savon, we had somebody else, Stan, working with us as well, brilliant machine learning scientist. But anyways, sat down and I was like, guys, I just processed your last payroll, and I don't have, like, literally, I only had like $50 or something left in the company account. Kind of just like, that's all I have. And if I can't attract funding in the next 30 days or so, count this as your 30-day notice. And it was awful because we've come this far. Like, we've seen, like, oh my God, we're almost there. Look at this traction. Like, I was showing the guys, I still have to this day, took Facebook pictures of the reviews back then. And when I present, I refer to them because they're awesome, right? But you know, it got to that point. It got to the point where it's just like, it's done. I've spent all of my money. I borrowed money from family, like everybody, just like nobody was willing to give me a dime. Like, literally, it's just like, go away. Yeah. And so I kind of was like, shit, what can I do? I can just, like, I have 30 days, just investors, like whomever is an investor or pretending to be one, which, you know, most of the time people are pretending to be an investor, not really an investor. Yeah. Anyways, I'm going to meet with all of them. And so that's what I did intensively for like 30 days or so. I was doing it before, but not as intense as I did it. So I had like 5-6 meetings with people. It was really tough on my mental health. It did really, like, I just wanted to sleep, because it was like the same type of questions, different people. Some would get your answer, some wouldn't. And then you can't get pissed off or emotional about it. Like, you need to understand why they are not getting it, leave the room, make changes so that it doesn't come up again.
Yeah.
Right. And doing it intensively, there's only so much time you can do. Like, you operate under stress for a really long time, it takes its toll, and it was certainly taking its toll. I remember I was at the office that we had. I was by the front desk, and I had my like last sort of like meeting. I was like Wednesday or Thursday, and I was talking to the front desk, the lady at the front desk, Emily, and it's just like, I just want to go home, take a nap. And she was like, go home, take a nap. You look awful. And I kind of was just like, I know, but there's this event I want to go to, which I knew the owner. There's this conference that one of my friends runs in town, and he was like, I want to update it. So why don't you come present? There might be some people with money there, right? I'm sure he was pitying me. I'm 100% certain that he was. But anyways, so anyway, I knew the guy, and I didn't want to let him down, kind of just like, but I really, really wanted to go home and take a nap. And have I gone home that day and taken a nap, it would have had a completely different ending to this story. So I went there. Despite all of it, I said, I'm just going to go there, do this. And back then, I remember I kept saying to myself, you miss 100% of shots you don't take, right?
Yeah.
I can't afford it. There are periods of time where you can afford it. You're like, okay, you know what? This is not high priority. I'd rather focus on a better priority.
Right.
But in that point in my life, I was just so goddamn low that I didn't have that opportunity. Like, I would pitch, like, I was going to the US just to see if, I can attract investors and money from Seattle, obviously because of the proximity. And I found myself in a situation where I was talking the TSA agent into getting a CGM, get a device on, get my app. And I kind of realized that he's just asking me like, wire, business or pleasure. I don't know. Like, I was just like on this, ready to go. Like, you ask how you are, right? That was kind of the thing. And so anyways, at the end of it all, I went to that event, I presented, I was at a point where I had like 100 and something slides, and the guy was like, dude, you're just 5 slides, what the hell? And I kind of like, listen, it's fine, but like, I want to bring it up if there are questions. And they're like, fine, that's okay.
Yeah.
So I got on stage, started the tape, did my thing. Some questions came up, and it was so funny because one of the judges there, which is actually a seed investor, has heard my pitch probably 3 times before that specific event. The video is still on YouTube. You can find it. It's at Cambridge House. That person seen me, heard me before. We were like, our office back then and his office was like within close proximity, ran into each other at the elevator and whatnot. And it wasn't up until that moment where he was forced to sit on stage and grade or, find the winner between, if they had a competition thing. It wasn't until that point where he was like forced to sit down and listen to what I was actually telling him. I swear to God, it was the same message. It's the same thing delivered like 4 times. And the 4th time was the charm, despite what they say. And, one thing he said is just like, it merits a further look. It's like, okay, well, at least that's good change.
Yep.
Answer the questions and everything. And then, thank you very much. Get off stage. And, I emptied my pockets because I had like a million things in there. Put everything back into my pockets, and I'm just like, oh, I'm missing the flash, the thumb drive that I brought with the slides. So I'm going around the back, grab the, my little thumb drive, and then I'm just like walking back, and they're doing their thing, obviously. And I'm just going home. I wanted to take a nap before this whole thing, and I kind of like, okay, I'm on a mission.
Done. Yeah.
Yeah. Just get out of my way. And I see the front that there was a girl behind the stage. She's like, where are you going? And I'm kind of like, I'm going home. I need to take a nap. I'm really tired. And she's like, no. You need to go back on stage. They're asking for you to come up there. And I'm like, why? I did my thing. And it's just like, no, you won. I'm like, really? It was a competition? So I run back up having no idea. I swear to God, the guy says like, oh, you won, blah, 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 something. I don't remember. And I'm kind of like, what? Seriously. And people laugh and I think I'm like, trying to be funny or something. But at the time, I had no clue what the guy was saying. It was just so unimportant. I kind of was just like, okay, today is done. I didn't manage to do anything. I need to go home and I need to take a nap. But a lady comes up after the event, and we talk, and obviously she becomes our lead investor. And I got very, very lucky because of that, because we have been in several situations where, you know, almost everything else, there was like the pandemic, there was this, there was that, the markets are bad. We got to a point where we ran out of money several times. And it was the fact that our lead investor was both in a position to help the company, but also believed in the vision enough to do so, despite the fact that, hey, you know what, this doesn't look good. But, you know, it's really important for you, you know, anybody who's out there who wants to, you know, find a lead. It's important for you and the lead to align in terms of what the objective of the product is. If the objective is to, you know, let's make a bang for our buck, that's an objective. But, you know, at some point you're going to start diverging from one another. And it's really important for the lead investor to see the value in the technology and the mission, actually. And multiple times, like, listen, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But at the end of it, we have this option as a last resort, or we can do that. And she's like, okay, no, you know what? It's fine. Don't do the last resort. I'll do this. I'll do that. And that was really important, because otherwise we'll have a completely different sort of story. But I noticed, for instance, you know, having a lead investor that happens to be a female also is something that people respond to it in a very interesting manner, because most of the time your lead investor is either, you know, a man or, you know, a VC or an agency, oftentimes, not always. When you do have a lead investor that's out of the ordinary, if you will, that kind of like makes others pause and kind of like, you know, have a different reaction that they would otherwise. And I can talk about this later, but anyways, I'm rambling again. Is any of this helpful?
No, this is exactly, I think this is absolutely perfect. I mean, out of this, I think we've already got two things. One, we need to do a part 2 on the rest of the story here, because that's there. And number 2, I think aligning with a lead investor in a strategy is its own one on itself again, right? And I think that's something that so many people can take amazing information away from. So Amir, I don't think you're done with me. I think this is a pause on podcast 1, but you're going to have to come back and continue your stories here, because I think we're really just scratching the surface with you about, you know, the MedTech space, but really navigating how to get through, as we said, navigating the MedTech maze, but really how to defy startup odds, how not to be one of those 9 out of 10 that fail, and some of the anxieties and things that go with it. We could do a whole series here, my friend. I'm hoping we're going to get a chance to do so. So, but with that, I know we've got to hit pause here as we've come to the end here, but I want to take a minute and thank you, Amir, for this amazing podcast, navigating the MedTech maze, predicting the future, and defying startup odds. As I said, I think we're just scratching the surface here. So thank you so much for your time today. We're going to get back and do this again for sure.
I'm glad you find my ramblings helpful.
I think everyone's going to find them helpful and entertaining, and waiting for the next episode to continue on, because this was just a fantastic. It's a real story, right? There's lessons to be pulled from here. It's truth. There's heart and soul. There's ups and downs, and like I said, I think we're just touching the surface of those, and I can't wait to get through more of your stories as we continue on here. And I want to thank our listeners as well. We can't do what we do without you. So until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, this has been one of my favorites. I am your host, Ryan Davies. Thanks, everybody. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.